Del, I wanted to continue our conversation to talk about arts and education. I remember growing up here in Eastern Iowa and having access to anything you can think of, and unfortunately so many students around the country and around the world don't have these same luxuries at this point. But as you know, the STEM is turning into STEAM to get the arts into the science, technology, educational program, if you will, as far as priorities. So you shared with me this list of 10 lessons the arts teach our children. And I wanted to discuss this because I think it's a great dialogue and information for people to have about why it's so important to have arts and education. So the first item on the list is judgment. And that involves, according to this, evaluating art, its function, society. Can you expound on how students are able to implement the skill of judgment in their decision-making capacities because of a program like what you've created?
Well, one of the things, if you compare looking at a work of art, like writing a paper for your English class, during the research part of writing the paper, you're gathering all of this data and all this information and all this input, and then you have to establish some order and create some kind of communication of these ideas and information that you gathered. And when you look at a work of art, it's sort of the reverse process. It's sort of counterintuitive to the way people have been educated and the process that you go through, because you see the piece whole. And instead of looking at the piece and thinking about what you're looking at, you also have to make these critical decisions about what you think the artist did and why you think the artist did that and what are they trying to tell you. And so instead of gathering little bits of information and molding them into one statement and an idea in a paper, you have to look at one artistic statement and you have to pick it apart. And so it's a reverse process that kind of fosters a flexibility in thought and an awareness of the critical thinking processes and skills, and then it also makes you pay attention to details and what you're looking at and so on. So, you know, it sharpens your observational skills, and then you end up having to determine what it all means as much as possible. And then there's also the thing that just because things are presented to you as objects of art, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to buy it as an object of art. You know, you've gone into museums or galleries and you've seen things and you've scratched your head and said, you know, I'm not sure this is art, you know. That's a perfectly legitimate thing. And so one of the things that I always harped on my students about the 10 years I was a classroom teacher was, I like it is not enough. I don't like it is not enough. I like it because this, this, and this. That's fine. I don't like it because of this, this, and this. That's fine too. So, you know, the idea that your opinion is only as good as the information you base it on, then it's an idea of, you know, well, get the facts, you know, look at the work, mine it for all of the information you possibly can. Use people like teachers and art historians and independent research, the internet, books, all kinds of things as resources to find out about what you're looking at. But it's still, nothing replaces the process of looking and at the original work of art, you know. The things that we were looking at during this program, for example, you know, they're much different in person than they are whenever you watch them on TV or if you see them in a photograph or so on. They're, you know, that Marvin Gaye song about ain't nothing like the real thing. You know, that's definitely true.
It applies to this.
That's definitely true.
All right, well, I'm sold on that. The second assertion here is that art helps to solve problems. I believe that. It makes you look at things from different angles to find that understanding. Is there a certain piece or key pieces that really hone in on this for some students?
Well, one of the things that we do, we're aware of our role in the classroom, and we're a museum, and the museum's job is to show students objects that artists have made. And so we're not so focused on the studio processes, on the making processes, but we do look at, well, what did these artists do to make this object? And so we walk them through the making process and the decision-making process. But we don't do it like the art teachers do. You know, we show pottery that's already been made and fired, but then when the teachers give them clay and teach them how to make it and then how to fire it and so on, that's a much different thing. And so, so we're looking at it from a little bit of a different angle, and so that the problem solving that we're doing is more of an analytical and critical thinking process than anything else.
Number 3, celebrate perspectives.
The idea is celebrating different perspectives within the kits that we take out, within the collection of objects that we take out. There's all kinds of different ideas that go on in the African works. There are ideas that go on in the American Indian works. There are ideas that go on in the Indian works and in the graphic novels collection and so on. And they represent all kinds of different perspectives. One of the things that we're careful to do as a museum staff and volunteers is to not make other cultures the other, you know? We try not to make them foreign. We try to make an awareness that there are differences and there are similarities and both are valid. Because one of the things that I've always found interesting about the studying of art, and the history of art goes back 35,000 years, and the questions have always remained the same. You know, it's always talked about, well, what's the nature of human experience and how do we represent that by making objects or buildings or paintings or symphonies or novels or whatever. But the questions are always about the same thing. You know, what does it mean to be a human being on the face of this planet for a time? Over time, you know, human nature really doesn't change. You know, we all are part of families, we're all a part of cultures, we're all a part of different groups and organizations and so on, you know, and we all know what it feels like to, you know, be happy, be sad, fall in love, lose someone you love, you know, and so on. And so all of these things that artwork talks about, any infinite number of things that are the content of what art's about, doesn't change at all, you know, but the forms are also infinite varieties of expressions about those ideas.
Right, universal themes interpreted through different eyes, understand. Teach complex problem solving is the next item on the list.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, complex problem solving, you know, one of the things with this is, for example, we're talking about the Acoma Pueblo and the people who lived up on top of this mesa. They didn't get that clay on top of that mesa. That rocky outcrop that sticks out of the ground in western New Mexico, they had to figure out, well, where do we get the clay from and how do we get it up there? And that was a problem-solving thing. You know, there's any number of problem-solving things. And so that's one example from our collection, you know, but then you have this painter who's, you know, kind of dying to paint, inspired to paint, and so on. You know, let's say that they have a poor-paying job. Well, what's the problem to be solved? How to get money to buy paints, right? So, you know, there's all kinds of problems that are solved in artwork, you know, even before you start making the decisions about making the objects, there's all kinds of problems to be solved. And then whenever you start making the objects, then you get into the design elements and principles, you know. What should the scale of the object be? If I make this painting too big, where's it going to be displayed? You know, if I make this piece and it's too fragile, is it going to break the first time somebody has to move it? You know, there's all kinds of problems and considerations that have to be made step by step along the way.
Just like real life.
Just like real life. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes that I had from an anthropology professor was, his quote was that living is a problem that has to constantly be solved. And I think that's true for art as well.
Yes. Unlimited knowledge.
Well, that's another one of these things too. You get into the realm of the imagination, and there is no limit to your imagination.
No.
That's one of those things, you know, there is sort of a past history and a past record whenever it comes to the arts. Art historians and critics and everything, they know the past and so on, but the future is always an open proposition, and it's what you make out of it. And so this idea of unlimited knowledge is that we're sitting here in 2012 and we have no idea what the artwork of 2020 is going to look like. We have kind of educated guesses, but, you know, it's going to be different than our educated guesses. You know,
right.
There's no predictability that is certain. There's predictability, but then you also have to factor in the unpredictability. The fact that somebody's going to come along with something that is going to just be groundbreaking.
Right.
And it happens all the time.
It does happen all the time. This definitely happens in the business world.
Yeah.
Small differences.
Well, one of the things with small differences that I like to talk about whenever I talk with students is the fact that they're all such individuals, you know, the fact that they all have just such unique perspectives and points of view on things. And so that's certainly the case with our audience and with the people on the staff and everyone else. And it's also true with the artists who make the artwork that we take to schools. One of the things with the artwork from the African collection is we pick things that are kind of traditional in nature. And so traditional for me just means, well, these kind of have stood the test of time and they've been doing it this way for a long time. And that doesn't mean that there isn't innovation and growth and change in these forms, because there is. We just pick things that kind of stuck closer to tradition whenever possible. So the American Indian pottery that we take to classes, you know, we took things that are representative of things over the past 100 and 200 and 300 and 400 years. We didn't take really contemporary, cutting-edge, avant-garde works because we wanted to show kind of some of the constant themes that continue on. And so that's one of those things that we've been taking a look at. And there are small differences in these works of art. And so, you know, you split hairs, and we have a few works by this artist Eric Fender, who was Maria Martinez's nephew. And in some of them, it's just the strict burnished black pottery, and then some of it he incorporates just a little bit of color, like the one piece that we showed you that has the green band around the top.
Quite beautiful.
And you know, and that's a really jarring break with tradition. But at the same time, it's just a real subtle detail to have that green band around the top instead of having it be black, you know. And so there are artists making choices whenever they make these objects, and providing some variety within the consistency of their traditions, of their cultural traditions.
Help to communicate. To me, I flashed back to when you said it's not okay to say I don't like it or I like it. I like it because, and articulate your thoughts and responses to a particular piece. So.
Well, I mean, the artists are always communicating an idea, even if it's a vague idea, even if it's an idea that you don't understand. There's always some kind of content to it. And so it's a matter of digging sometimes and finding out what that content is. But you know, if you go to the churches in Italy during the Renaissance and you look at those fresco paintings by Michelangelo, he's communicating an idea in that Sistine Chapel ceiling. And it starts with, you know, the creation of light, where God is separating light from darkness. And then he creates the sun, moon, and planets. And then God creates Adam. And then Adam and Eve get thrown out of the Garden of Eden. And then they have their children and so on. And it goes through the whole book of Genesis and so on. And it tells a story, and it's communicating an idea about the creation of the world. This Bamana dance crest communicates the same idea from the Bamana perspective. And so, you know, there's two ideas that are exactly the same, but two art objects that look completely different and that are born from a different place and a different idea about what the creation actually was. And so then you have scientists who are out there and saying, well, God didn't do it, and no bomb and a creator person did it, but it was a Big Bang explosion, and that started matter, and so on, and so on. And so you do get all of these different perspectives and different ideas that take place in the artwork. But the key to make sure that students understand is that art is always about something, and like and don't like and all that. That's a personal point of view, and one of the things that we do is we don't necessarily try to get students to adopt our point of view. We get them to try to explore their own point of view.
Right. So understanding from a communication standpoint,
Right.
Understanding the position of the artist,
Right.
but then also understanding the position of
Right.
their.
Right, we advocate on behalf of the art, but we advocate to an audience, and so one of the things that we're trying to do is speak on behalf of the art to the audience. And so, when a student will look at it and say, that's a piece of junk, or anybody could do that, or whatever, we're standing back there as a staff going, now wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. And, and people do have their own personal tastes and interests and likes and dislikes. And I'm certainly not trying to change those. I am trying to change their understanding of the looking process at the artwork. That's what I'm trying to do, is getting them kind of in the habit of looking and digging deeper and looking closer, because I believe that no time spent looking at artwork is a waste of time. You may not understand it right off of the bat, but as long as you're looking, and as long as you're engaged, and as long as you're trying, that's the important part.
Don't you think that definitely plays into interpersonal relationships? You may not understand a person, but if you work at trying to understand, build that relationship, and even if not a full relationship, build that understanding to gain some respect, that I think it falls
Well, I think
hand in
that
hand.
is true, because I know for myself personally, a lot of my very best friends are people that I really didn't like at first, and then while I tried to figure out what it was about them that I didn't like, I got to know them better, and then it was like, oh, okay, and then we clicked, and so on. And so, I think it is this matter of a personal relationship, and looking at an artwork is a lot like encountering a person for the first time. You're going up to it and saying, who are you, what are you, where did you come from, why were you made, that sort of thing. And so you have sort of the same sort of questions that you do of people.
Okay, the last one on the list is position and curriculum.
Yeah.
So arts and education really acknowledges a basic need. And I'll
Yeah,
let
I
you
think
take
it
it from there.
acknowledges a basic need, because one of the things about art that people don't necessarily understand is art's always the first thing on the chopping block when it comes to budget cuts and things like that, where music is not and sports are not, Well, parents and administrators and audiences, they go watch musicians perform. They go watch athletes perform. But artists are more introspective, and they need the quiet and they need the private to do their work. And so a lot of the times it's easy to overlook that area of the curriculum. But then in another way, that artwork and that artistic process, the making of and the thinking about, that gives students a voice, who may not be interested in these other things. I'm not trying to say that the arts are more special than other areas, I'm just saying that they're equally as special as the other areas, that the fact that they do access a student's brain in a different manner than math and science and than the left brain type processes, and then you go over into the right brain. The arts actually make you use both sides of your brain, because you have to be analytical as well as creative and so on. But the idea, that the arts are a different discipline altogether, the thing that I like about art is that it is by nature interdisciplinary. You cannot understand art without understanding social studies. You cannot understand art without knowing something about storytelling. You cannot understand art without doing all of these other things, you know. So in order to make ceramics, you have to know some things about science, whether
Yes,
you
you do.
realize it or not, and so on. So there's all kinds of decisions to be made that incorporate left brain as well as right brain skills. And so I think it's a unique way for this to be positioned within the curriculum. So as I said before, we visit as many social studies classes as we do art classes. And so we talk about the place that these works come from, and then we talk about the works. And then if we visit the art classes, we talk about the art form, the form, and then we talk about the design elements and principles. And then, oh yeah, we talk about the place where they come from and the culture in which they were made and what their function was. And so, so we do end up kind of tying it all together. And so that's one of the things that I like about art is it's by nature interdisciplinary. It lends itself to that much more readily than a lot of other disciplines do.
I agree.
So.
Well, thank you for going through this list and enlightening us on these 10 points.
No problem.
Okay, let's keep arts and education. All right, thank you, Dale.
You're welcome.
Frame is sponsored by Allegra, Click Marketing Solutions, Stylefolio Jewelry,